This week on the VROOM podcast, red flags,
flimsy tires,
a podium for the people,
and the return of Romain Grosjean.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 8 of the VROOM podcast. I'm your host, Willis Jones, along with my wonderful co-host, Simon Martel. How's it going,
everybody.
Simon?
It's going good. Hopefully the viewers at home notice a difference in the audio quality. I just dropped some money for a mic, so that's going to be exciting. If you're following on video, you'll see me bending down. I'm still getting used to it. I don't know the right distance and stuff, so hopefully, Wills, you can call me out if ever I'm getting too far away. But
I'll let you know.
I feel a lot more professional right now. I'm feeling like I might go bald and do some DMT soon, just full on Joe Rogan. You know? So there you go. Feeling very good. Happy to be here. What a race we had the privilege to have on Sunday. Very exciting stuff.
Just an exciting weekend all around. I feel like we had, the potential of big drama in practice with Mercedes looking slow, and then the red flags littering qualifying, and oh my God, that race.
Yeah, and the craziest thing is that just on a perspective of like the race itself might have not been that entertaining, but because of how it happened and the last little lap, like 2 laps that we got, just made it a real contender for probably race of the season without being too quick, but really a spectacle. So without spoiling everything that happened, I think we can start maybe going through slowly the weekend, kind of what happened. And first thing I would want to start with is the track itself, Baku. So maybe right here we'll post a track picture or something just to give you guys an idea. But man, what a weird track. Who would have thought that 90-degree angles would make for such great racing?
I want to see more like hard right angle corners. That it was an amazing racing car.
There's definitely something there. I think
they seem to be able
something.
to fight so well around those corners, and that first section is just a big rectangle. I love it.
Yeah, and
the long straightaway too.
Yeah, I agree.
Slipstreams.
It's a pretty crazy track. So I guess before we keep on going, for people who might not know, who just tuned in, started following F1. So last weekend, the race was in Azerbaijan at their capital, Baku. It's a street circuit, meaning that they do not have a full-on racetrack that's there all year long, but instead they race through the cities of the capital. And so you can imagine an oil-rich country like Kazakhstan. Oh my God, Azerbaijan. They have some wide-ass highways that make for really good racetracks.
Yeah, and that the big long straightaway is they take up like 2 kilometers of that city's major highway. They really do shut down the entire city.
Yeah, I was gonna say it must be hell for traffic during that weekend. But
I watch a photographer's YouTube videos, and he says moving around the track on the weekend, you can't get from there are certain corners where it will take you a half hour to get back to the start finish line. You miss most of the race just trying to get back to the paddock if you're way out, just because of how hard it is to get around.
And then you see as well that people have apartments along the streets, and you're like, oh well, they just got locked out of their apartments for 3 days.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. But you know what, that's the beauty of an authoritarian regime. Kind of do whatever they want. And
exactly.
We selfish Westerners get to just enjoy a good racetrack. So going on from that, I really love Baku because there's 3 parts to it, which I think makes it very special. It's not at all repetitive or boring. We can kind of divide it into first of all, those right angle, those corners. So right off the straight, it's a 90-degree corner left. Then you get another 90 corner left. So you kind of start forming a rectangle. So you're going around a city block. And then you have 3 more right corners. Not right, turning right, but yeah, square corners, which makes
square corners.
For really great racing, because as we'll talk a bit later on, it's very unapologetic for people that mess up their turns. So that right there is definitely my favorite part of that racetrack. It then goes on to a kind of long swerving park, which goes around like their old town, I imagine you could call it. It's like there's a castle. It's very picturesque, but it's a fast section with nobody passing there. And then finally, it ends up on a straight, which is the highway we're talking about, or at least a big boulevard. And it's one of the fastest section of racing of all season, which I think is always a very interesting point when you think, I would never have guessed that middle of a city would be where the cars are the fastest.
Yeah, and like what they can reach 215 miles an hour if they're
I was
really
like, man, those are
pushing
rookie numbers. You got to pump it up. I was thinking in kilometers. I was like, yo, it's like 350.
it.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
brain
So
doesn't compute kilometers very well when I'm thinking of like high speeds. Anything over 100 kilometers, I have to like switch my brain into miles.
yeah, fair enough. Me, it's every time I'm on the highway in the States, I always have that kind of first hesitation crossing the border, like, oh, 60. Wow, this is so slow here. And I'm like, oh yeah, miles. Okay, let's bump these numbers up. So that's the track. Kind of similar. Would you agree with Monaco in the aspect that it has some very like unforgiving kind of track because it's surrounded by those barricades along most of it, meaning that there's not many places to go off on grass or get in a gravel pit because those don't exist around here.
Yeah, I was watching the race and I think like the qualifying session getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I felt like all the flags that came out in qualifying seemed like it kind of should have been a Monaco qualifying session, just
Yeah.
with all this stuff that was happening. And I think people like revere Monaco so much, and it's so like, that they're so cautious around there that you don't see it a lot. And I feel like they kind of got to Baku and forgot how much damage walls could really do.
Yeah, and as well, at least what we see here in Baku is that they do have those escape roads. So for people who might have not watched the race, at a couple of those 90-degree angles that we were talking about, there's like a runoff area where drivers who lock up or feel like they're not going to make the turn had the decision to essentially just go straight instead of continuing on the racetrack. And then there's like barriers to kind of limit them, like hold them back if ever their brakes had completely failed. But it kind of brings me, one of my favorite part of that weekend is seeing those drivers drift around to try to bring the car back to the track.
Oh yeah, and Gasly on the Alpha Tauri, he had to back up at one point, and the Alpha Tauri has like the same beeping mechanism that like big trucks do when they back up.
Yeah, and as always, I think it's like a classic that you hear from announcers every single time. But if ever Valtteri Bottas is in one of those runoff areas, the announcer's gonna be, oh, and here you're gonna see his rallying skills. As you can see, he really controls well as the car, because then he'll kind of do a quick handbrake turn and drift the back of the car to do a quick 180 and get back on track, which is always great. I think as drivers get older, you see them kind of it's kind of a point of pride that they're not going to back into the track. They're going to drift around and get going again.
Yeah, do a half donut and get back going.
Yeah. Oh my God. Could you imagine the embarrassment of having to find reverse on those cars?
Oh.
And so we've been kind of talking a bit about how the racing has been, and I think it's a good segue into the practice. So like in every weekend, there's the 3 practice sessions, 2 on Friday and then 1 on Saturday. Do you have any thoughts about how those practice sessions worked, or not worked, sorry, but went? Like, how do you think the cars and the teams looked?
I thought they looked pretty good. Sergio Perez was fastest in FP2, put it on the pole for practice, so to speak, and the Mercedes were slow.
Oh my God. Can we talk about this? Like, they usually are slow during free practice 1 and 2. That's usually when they go on different set of tires than the competitive one. You don't expect them to do much. But on free practice, like they usually do like 8, 6. They're not like going for that podium, but they're still have like one of the best cars ever made. No, this weekend they were like 15th, 16th. It was horrible. They were so slow.
Yeah, it was atrocious. And you see them come out in the race. And now for the race, Lewis and Valtteri had completely different setup cars. They brought a like new rear wing spec and a whole bunch of stuff for Lewis's car and left Valtteri's just the way it was.
Oh, that kind of explains then what happened during the race, and we'll get back to that. But I hadn't realized there was some different specs going on. I thought there was maybe just back to like the driver talent.
No, the Mercedes were running completely different setup vehicles for Lewis and Valtteri.
Yeah. I guess just to finish free practice before we get to qualification, and then we can talk about the race, which was a pretty interesting and entertaining one. That's during free practice, and when we started seeing those 90-degree turns were actually pretty tricky. How many crashes do you think happened? I'm trying to remember. I thought I had the number, but I don't have it for free practice. But turn 15 during on that track, probably have seen at least 10 cars nose go right into it.
Oh yeah, it like there's so many technical, tricky, tight sections, and I think turn 15, that's the going up the castle section, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's that last 90 degrees before the fast and curvy.
Yeah, how many cars went off? I would say at least half the field.
Yeah, I think that's like reasonable to think that like there was really like a period to try to get used to it. They really had to like settle down into it.
Very much so. And I think like practice on a track like this as well, like it's really like they're trying to feel out the track, really like get it re-rubbered in and like wear in the track and stuff. So I think a lot of like the crashes that you see in practice and stuff are potentially from there just not being the amount of rubber on the track to have the cars grip properly, but it makes it for quite an exciting weekend when almost everybody gets a chance to go into the wall.
Yeah, I love that as well because I think it kind of leads well to one of the big topics of this weekend is the crashes during qualification and what happens afterwards. And I think if you have nothing else to say about free practice, I think we can start talking about qualification, which was action packed as well.
Oh yeah.
So quali was the most incident packed qualification session since 2016, where there was 4 red flags at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Well, this year in 2021 at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, we saw 4 red flag as well, meaning there wasn't only a red flag per qualification session. There was one that had 2.
Man, and what you hear if you listen to the team radio, Max Verstappen came on and he started complaining about racing at city circuits because there's so many red flags, like everybody crashes. This is terrible. But I think as a fan, it makes it so exciting to be able to watch these guys go around and like they're the best drivers in the world, and then to still see them make these mistakes. It really shows how hard they're pushing and how technical of a track they're racing on.
I agree. I think seeing those mistakes that are done by like really good racers, like it's not just trash and like no, okay, that's very that might be a bit too direct of a term, but like it's not maybe the racers you would have expected that are still getting to grip with their new cars, some rookies that have crashed. It's people that have been on the circuit for a long time. So talking about who had a red flag, Lance Stroll in Q1 had a red flag. He's been racing for 4 or 5 years. It's not a rookie anymore. He's an experienced person on the grid. He has had a lot of experience. He has won in the past in Azerbaijan. So it just
not
proves that.
one on the podium.
Yeah,
He
thank you.
was Williams' last podium. He came
Yeah,
third.
yeah.
He did do a shoey though.
Yeah, that does mean though that like I think it's good to show that this sport, like everybody, even like a successful driver still has to push it to the edge, and they still make mistake, which really definitely keeps the action going for us as fans.
Yeah, and I think like Giovinazzi also going out in Q1 just after Stroll. Giovinazzi's been in the sport for quite a while as well. He was well established at Alfa Romeo when Charles Leclerc came in for his teammate for a season. He's a good driver, and he still was one of the guys that got caught out on that track and crashed out.
Yeah, and so if we can kind of think about it, Q1 usually is a tough one. There's kind of those two bottom teams that have difficulty getting out of it, but George Russell has been getting out of Q1 for every single qualification session this season. So that's very impressive. And he kind of got his ass saved by those two crashes. Stroll and Giovinazzi getting crashing during Q1 kind of saved Russell. That was P15 because then Latifi, Schumacher, and Mazepin both got disqualified right out of Q1. So Russell, by the skin of his teeth, just qualified thanks to those two crashes.
Yeah, man, George Russell, I cannot wait until he is in a proper competitive car and we can see him tear it up in Q3. I think he is such a special driver and has so much more to offer than that Williams is letting him show us.
Yeah, Mr. Saturday is definitely just waiting to have a car to become Mr. Sunday, But
exactly.
Yeah, I was about to say that I believe in Williams, but I kind of given up on that team. It's gonna be a lot of catching up for them, especially with the kind of them bleeding money for so long, just trying to keep up. You can hope that the new regulation is going to give them the switch and the little kickback that they need to get back in force.
Yeah, hopefully the new regulations even everything out a little bit for some of those smaller teams. Definitely I hope for Williams. I have a little special connection with them of a namesake, so I hope they do well in the future.
Yeah.
Moving on to Sonoda's crash, and it kind of resulted in Sergio's crash as well in Q3 and putting a stop to the session, which secured Charles Leclerc his back-to-back pole positions, and he actually got to start from pole position this time.
Yeah, because he didn't crash this time. So I agree. But apparently the Ferrari master plan still plans on getting a Ferrari to crash so that they can start on pole. I mean, if it works, don't fix it. If it ain't broken, don't fix it, right? They just found they just found their master strategy. Crazy to see Ferrari getting on poles 2 weekend in a row. I wasn't expecting it. I still see Ferrari as that really struggling team that they were last season. They've shown that at least they're semi-competitive on street circuits. So it's good to see them there. I think they have one of the strong driver lineups, and yeah, good for Leclerc to not have a gearbox issue this weekend.
Yeah, it's good to see Ferrari not being the old guy sitting in the corner going, back in my day.
The crazy part for me is how they kept every single weekend just having the worst tactical decision week in and week out, and it seems like they might have hired someone else or figured something out, because they're actually making pretty good decisions now, which is
somebody got smacked upside the head and started making right choices.
Maybe felt that his job wasn't as secure, so he he went back and read a couple books on F1 strategy. But just to kind of wrap up quality before we move on, Q2 had no crash, if you guys followed along what we're just saying. So Q1 had Lance Stroll and Giovinazzi crash out, and then Q2 we had Russell P15, Raikkonen P14, Ricardo P13, Ocon P12, Vettel P11, and then Bottas just squeaking in at P10. Who would have thought that a Mercedes was barely going to qualify at P10? I would never have guessed that last year. Well, at the start of the season, even, or 2 races ago.
Yeah. And it like something that stood out for me was when Seb didn't make it into Q2, the commentator or Q3, sorry, the commentators on the Sky Sports broadcast said, well, he's going to get choice of tires at the start of the race. And they were like, well, I think I would rather start 11th and have a choice of starting tire than get into Q3, maybe start 10th and have to start on your qualifying tire.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be very interesting to talk about that for the race itself. Kind of a tease, but we're probably going to have an episode about just tire it's themselves and tire strategy. It's a lot more in depth than I ever imagined when I started following F1. And if ever we can kind of do a tire crash course, I think it's going to be a very interesting subject to dive into. But to finish qualification, Bottas was 10th, like we were saying. Alonso 9th, Tsunoda 8th, Perez 7th, Norris 6th, Sainz 5th, Gasly 4th, Verstappen 3rd, Hamilton 2nd, and then Leclerc 1st. So Leclerc was on pole. If you guys followed along, I know I just said a lot of names, but we had both AlphaTauris make it to Q3, which is just something great to see. I'm always happy to have some underdog performance, and AlphaTauri have just proven again and again that they always just deserve to be where they are.
Man, I don't know if we can keep calling AlphaTauri an underdog team with their like pretty consistent performances with Pierre Gasly and what he's getting out of that car. And then you can see it with Yuki Tsunoda, man. He can also drag a pretty good performance out of that car as well. I think, they're really starting to turn themselves from what was a junior team into a proper, Red Bull sister team and actually be competitive. Do I think they'll fight for championships? Probably not. But I definitely think they're getting into a position where they could probably spoil some championships.
And they've proven that they deserve their place on the grid, and that's for sure. And like they're just a great team to follow. I don't know if there's AlphaTauri has a lot of dedicated hard fans, probably in Italy. I imagine a couple of their hometown fans, but it's good to see them, and I can definitely say that I always root for them, and I have both driver on my fantasy league, so I definitely believe in AlphaTauri's chance to always score some points.
And please, viewers and listeners, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think before AlphaTauri was obviously they were Toro Rosso, and before that, I'm pretty sure they were Minardi F1. So there could still be some carryover fans. I think that was Fernando Alonso's first team. So the infrastructure of that team does have some history in Formula One. So potentially they have some carryover fans, but definitely this team now is definitely getting some new fan bases. And I want to cover this before we go is Mercedes playing favorites this weekend. So not only did Lewis have the optimal setup with, they played around with his rear wing a lot to try and make the car better on the straights, so that potentially they could claw back some time, because as we saw in Monaco, that car is not the best through the twisty sections and the slow, tight corners. So I think, recognizing that there's a pretty big, straightaway at Baku, and that it's very much a win-loss, give take sort of track. I think they opted for a faster setup for the longer straightaways instead of maybe a more tight and nimble setup for the corners. So in qualifying, Bottas gave Hamilton a tow for both of Lewis's flying laps, and Valtteri never got one. And he came over the radio, why am I giving Lewis a tow again? Like, it's my turn. And they said, no, Valtteri, you don't have the setup. We're going with Lewis.
That's so crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy. And I think it's crazy to see as well, where like we've seen it in other races and we've seen it at other venues as well, where that toe on that straightaway is so huge. It makes such a difference that even seeing like people kind of stealing, if you want, or like snatching that toe from a competitor right after their hot laps and getting a like 2-second bonus, and it makes such a difference. So the fact that Valtteri never got one kind of looks bad on made him look bad, but it kind of puts him in a very tough position because he's definitely treated unfairly in this situation.
Yeah. And George Russell has come out recently saying that he wants to drive a more competitive car. And, he made a big statement. I'm obviously signed with Mercedes and they're going to do what they think is best for me. And, I've urged them to put me in a more competitive car for 2022 and blah, 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 blah. I wouldn't be surprised if Valtteri Bottas goes and races rally cars next year and
Yeah,
we see George Russell
yeah,
at
especially
Mercedes.
since the talk of him was like there was talks from like for the last 2 seasons, there's been talk about him having to leave team, getting kicked out. And that's when he was putting performances like second in the championship for like years in a row. And now that he's actually like not at all in the top for the driver standings, I don't see why Mercedes would keep him. So I agree. His seat is definitely in jeopardy. We'll see if he's able to come back, but his morale kind of looks shaken up. He doesn't look as confident in himself. The car doesn't look as good, but that's the same. You could say the same about Lewis, where the car is definitely just not as dominant as it been as in year past.
Yeah, for sure. Red Bull is definitely closing up that gap. And I'm not sure if it's, Red Bull's closing the gap or if Mercedes is getting slower, because we're also seeing other teams, start to claw closer to that Mercedes car. So I think Mercedes might have to take a look in the mirror and go, are we, really doing everything that we can here? And do we have the driver lineup that we really need?
You know what really scares me? I'm thinking they just gave up on this season and they're just gonna start that domination next season again. And I just really hope that's not what happens. Please don't
I'm
just give us
praying.
a season of hope.
Oh, that would be
Yeah,
atrocious if that happened.
yeah. I
So
mean,
another thing that happened in qualifying was the Lando Norris grid penalty. That one just kind of like snuck under the radar. He approached the pit lane and there were red flags, and I think he was worried he was going to come into the pit lane too fast and
and get a
potentially get
penalty for
a
fast. Yeah.
speeding penalty in the pit lane. So he opted to take another lap and got a penalty anyways. So I don't know what the penalty potentially would have been if he did happen to speed in the pit lane. I doubt it would have been a grid place penalty.
Yeah. I think before we move on, I'd like to kind of just wrap up on a subject that we talked about in Monaco, and we're going to talk about a lot this week again. But all of those red flags kind of bring the questions of, you know, what's the fairness in having, a driver crash out and freezing the standing so that a lot of drivers don't even have their chance to run their hot laps and try to have better times, especially looking at how the standings finished. Like Leclerc was probably just lucky that he was one of the first to do his hot lap and get his time in, because Verstappen definitely had one of the faster pace all weekend and was probably going to take pole, as well as I imagine I would have seen Perez put a lot better position. Norris, Gasly was putting there. Hamilton had been struggling with his car as well. So just the fact that that red flag has stopped the session, stopped it in Q1, stopped it in Monaco. I think, and Alonso brought up the point of saying, well, at one point, should we just maybe put a consequence on drivers being almost reckless and not giving that chance, not giving that opportunity to other teams to perform as best as they can? So what do you think would happen if we put in kind of a condition where maybe if you crash or if a teammate crash, the last lap time that you put in is deleted, and so that would definitely change up the standings a lot.
Yeah, and it would definitely make, drivers in Q3. I could definitely see that becoming, like, okay, if you crash in the last 5 minutes of Q3, your best time gets deleted and we go down to, your second best time.
Yeah.
You would definitely see drivers, be more cautious in that, last bit of Q3, and really, like, it really have to think about, okay, is it worth pushing my absolute hardest to be able to put it up higher and potentially crash the car, or do I get it around safe and make sure that I don't have a potential penalty, or being slowed down or whatever. I
It's
think I would definitely like to see that.
all right. I think that we're both on the side because I was thinking about like maybe like the concept, the drawbacks. Like I don't see people just slow it down a lot more. I think the stakes would just be a lot higher, and it would just make it so that like the best drivers would definitely be the best driver on top. Like if I'm not saying that because you crash you're a bad driver, but you've made that mistake and you've crashed, well, you don't deserve to start first, or to be in a position that maybe isn't representative of where you should start.
Yeah, I quite like that idea.
All right, well, maybe, and we're gonna send this tape to the FIA, and once we hear back from them, we'll let you know.
They really need to start listening to our podcast. We have so many good ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that kind of wraps up the qualification session. So it kind of gave us a little flash of what was gonna happen. Uh, tight st- tight street circuit. We got to lead to a lot of crashes, and it was kind of it almost was kind of like a carnival show, where just the amount of crashes and red flags made the qualification sessions kind of a nightmare, but was overall very entertaining. So that was on Saturday. Now we're on to Sunday. Let's start the race, Wolves. What happened first lap?
Well, it's lights out and away we go, and immediately George Russell comes into the pits. When I saw, I was like, what is happening here? Like, what? It turned out it turned out he had presumably the right idea. Pit in early for those hard tires, because of the super long straight and how slow the tight technical section is. The hard tires were the tires to be on. They would heat up nicely, and then through the corners, and you'd have the long straight for them to be able to cool off a little bit and
But
get
why
back
wouldn't he
into the
have
lap.
started the race with them?
The soft tires for getting off the line give you
Oh,
far
maybe try to
better
make one or two.
better
Well,
yeah,
even if you had
far
made
better
this
like grip and
position, you would have
jump.
given them back right away.
I don't know why they wouldn't have started on them then.
Because did he leave the pits afterwards? Like he raced a little bit, right?
Um yeah, he pit like immediately and was, I think, driving around by himself for a little bit, but definitely caught up to the field.
Because he didn't finish the race. He had a DNF, but it's a strange strategy. Maybe I wouldn't imagine. I feel like it has it come out. Like, do we know the reason why?
No, I like
Okay,
you're watching like they're all lining up on the grid for the final restart, and he just trundles his way into the pit lane.
that's
I have
crazy.
not heard as to why that car didn't finish the race.
Well, there you go. So that was lap one. Leclerc was first. As they leave, Leclerc had a lot of difficulty on the start. He was already like being pursued. Um, Fast forward a couple of laps, Leclerc lost the lead right away. His car was never competitive enough to keep him up front. He got passed by Hamilton first, then by Verstappen, and then when he started pitting, he lost another position to Perez. So, what do you think happened to Ferrari during the race?
I just don't think Ferrari is currently fast enough in a straight line to really be able to be competitive on a track like Baku. Like you said, like he probably only got that pole position because of the red flag at the end and drivers not being able to complete their final flying lap. I think if, everybody gets to finish their final flying lap, he's probably starting 6th, 7th. So it definitely, and I think that, showed in the race. He gets passed on, he got passed on lap 1, like right away, no DRS. Lewis came screaming by him
on the second lap. So they did
lap,
the
yeah.
first lap, and then as soon as they hit that straight again, there was no chance. No DRS.
Yeah,
That's true. It was crazy.
And it looked like a DRS pass
Yeah.
with no DRS open.
Yeah, pretty absurd. But it's just because of that toe, like we're talking about. If you're able to get to sit into that toe, it's just an absurd slipstream that really pushes you fast. Like that really brings you closer to the person in front of you.
Oh yeah.
And so after a couple of laps, we talked about how Leclerc fell down the positions, but Hamilton was first, followed by Verstappen, and then Perez. So Red Bull had finally those two, they're 1-2 in the top, the support that they've been wanting to give to Max for so long. Well, it was happening during this race, and finally what happened was really great to see as a Red Bull fan. So Hamilton decided to pit first, which was kind of a surprising point. Usually Hamilton is very good at
theory on this.
Okay, well, I'll just finish my phrase and then I agree with you. So usually Hamilton is very good at taking care of his tires, and so seeing him pit first was very surprising. And then we saw like strategy getting adapted. So Wills, why do you think Hamilton pitted first?
So if you were watching the race, when Lewis comes into the pits, the whole Red Bull pit crew is standing in their pit box looking like they're ready to go for a pit stop. So I think potentially Mercedes saw the Red Bull guys come out and get ready and went, we're pitting now before Max can get in because we're ahead of him. And they pit, and then Max kept going.
Yeah,
which I think somewhat threw them off.
Yeah, and it was a great, like, quick decision by Red Bull because Max, during that one lap before he pitted, because he pitted exactly one lap after Hamilton, got some clear air, and I think set one of the fastest lap of the day during that exact one lap that Hamilton pitted. And as soon as he finished that lap, got into the pits, came of course, Red Bull with the fastest pit of the day, 1.9 second blazing pit stop from the crew, released him, and he just came out in front of Hamilton easy. So it was an incredible strategy by Red Bull. Very happy for Max. But the best part about that was that once Hamilton came into the pits, what really helped Max as well was that he got his tires changed, and I think Mercedes would have had a quick pit stop, except for the fact that Gasly came into the pits right at that moment, and that held up Hamilton a couple extra seconds to make sure that they didn't have an unsafe release. And so as Gasly came in, Hamilton had to wait, and then finally got released. Maybe did a 4-second pit stop instead of the 2 seconds that he would have needed. And with Max's quick lap, it turned out that they just managed to undercut him perfectly, and Red Bull got in front.
Yeah, and I've heard some, people crying on the internet with the, well, why did he get, why does pit stop take so long? He should have just gone. Well, if he went, instead of it being, a 3-second or 4-second pit stop, he would have had
10-second,
a full 10-second stop go penalty in the
unsafe
release. So it definitely, the give and take there, I think Mercedes made the right decision in just holding him back for a little bit longer. But
you know what my favorite talk about on the internet was that AlphaTauri had planned it, that there was that there was a conversation, and AlphaTauri timed it to arrive exactly that half second they needed to slow down Hamilton. What are the odds?
Definitely some team play going on there, I would imagine.
No, I'm doubtful. That's a ridiculous planning. That's just what happens. But very funny to hear people saying, like, it's not the same team. It wasn't like Albon holding him up. No. It was oh, AlphaTauri, the sister team, they have the same engine. Oh, there's communication happening. Sorry, Hamilton fans.
Keep dreaming, boys.
And so, yeah, so Hamilton pits, and then a bit later on, Albon pits in, and just perfect timing again by Red Bull.
Or
And as he comes
Perez,
out, oh,
not
sorry,
Albon.
thank you. Yeah, exactly, Perez. And so as Perez comes out, he comes out in front of Hamilton, and now Red Bull has that perfect 1-2 with their support player being Perez, helping protect Verstappen's place. So
And
so
man, like
far, a perfect weekend for Red Bull. But so far, the race isn't over yet.
and like how the tables have turned for that. Like you saw all, last season, the season before, Max against Mercedes. Well, it was Lewis against Red Bull this weekend, and I I for one was ecstatic to see that for Red Bull, the fact that they were able to really take the fight to Mercedes again and have the rear gunner that they have been wanting for so long for Max Verstappen. That that is a beautiful team, and I cannot wait to see the rest of the season and see these two guys compete and push.
I agree. And my other favorite part was that Perez has come out at the start of the season that he's going to need about 5 races to get used to the car. And Baku was the 6th race of the season. And as we'll see, I think Perez has been able to get used to the car. And so
He's at
without
home.
spoiling it too much, the next big thing that happened during the race was Lance Stroll crashed. And right here, everybody who's listening should know that we're both Canadians. I really like Lance Stroll. I'm a big supporter. And I'm going to say it's not his fault, but what a crash. And I'm happy he was able to come out of there fine and unscathed.
And I'm going to say, after seeing the terrifying Romain Grosjean crash last year, anytime I see a car go careening off to a side when they're supposed to be going in a straight line, it terrifies me. I was holding my breath until I heard the commentator say he was moving around in the car, just because that was such a high speed impact, and it seemed like the car went pretty head on into that wall. And man, I could not imagine being Lawrence Stroll and owning the team and that being your son. Like it, oh, that must have been terrifying.
And he was there that weekend, and you just see the TV, and you're trying to make sure everybody, that he's walking and everything. But it was a pretty crazy impact, because I personally would have thought the biggest impact would be around a corner. You see it where the crash between Bottas and Russell, like you go through a corner, hit the barricades full speed. Well, here what happened was that it was in the middle of the straightaway. And so the car wasn't turning. The car wasn't in any extreme movement. It was literally going into a straight line, and the tire exploded. It was a tire failure. I think we're going to talk about this a bit later on, because it was really violent, and there's a lot of things to say about it, but full on tire failure. And what's really interesting is that those cars with that rear wing are designed to have so much pressure that glues them to the road, that as soon as you saw that one of the tires broke up, that all of that pressure just went into lateral movement and whipped the car to the side. And so it's pretty crazy to see just how much the aerodynamics are important, and just a slight modification to them just makes a car completely undrivable.
Yeah. And it too, like, it snaps, and like initially, like sawing at the wheel, and I think, oh sorry, I think if he hadn't, lifted off the gas, like, thankfully he's an experienced driver and he knows what to do in the situation where you crash, where, obviously I think if potentially if one of us got in a crash like that, like our foot's probably still flat to the floor by the time, we're hitting the wall. And that is not a pretty solution, or not a pretty ending.
Yeah, and you heard on the radio how, like, he was definitely, he was shook. Like, he was that crash had scared him, because he wasn't expecting it. And I think this is a recurring kind of a occurrence with those tire failure, was that while there's so many sensors in F1 cars and so many things are tracked, that explosion had never been seen. Nobody was expecting it. Nothing really showed that it was going to happen. And then it just happened in that, like, millisecond, and completely finished Lance Stroll's race.
Yeah, and just like the abruptness of it and how just quickly it happened. And then immediately over the radio, he's saying like, whoa, like tire failure. And then he wanted a red flag because he was in a very sketchy position. Like that car bumped out almost back into the middle of the road. And I think it was Gasly right behind him. If Gasly was any closer, that's two cars making contact at above 200 miles an hour.
Yeah. And that, I think it's the F1 cars are not built like other race cars. When we're talking about those cars crashing into each other right now, I was thinking about NASCAR, which is a common occurrence almost. But these have such crazy frames all around them and a lot more space in the front and the back to absorb like damage that I wouldn't want to see it with a fragile little F1 car.
Yeah, these things are built like fine china. Like they're not designed to take any real sort of impact, and the only impacts they're really designed to take are sort of glancing blows from the side and slightly from the front on a wall, and that's just, the front wing will come off and the wheel will come off, and that's pretty much all that is really there to structurally protect you. And then obviously the halo.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, this isn't to say that the drivers are driving a death machine. Like the technology now that exists, like the drivers are almost in like I'm trying to find the right word, like a cocoon of like very strong materials. So the entire cockpit where they sit, like from their legs up to their shoulders, is a reinforced thing that I don't see getting pierced, or where they're very well protected. And then of course they have a helmet, they have the halo. So there's not much of their parts that are exposed, but there's definitely, the crashes happen and there's definitely always risk. So that's kind of just the comment where, of course, I think as well that the red flag should have came out, especially when you start seeing them walk out of their cars, getting away and walking around on the streets. Like, you don't want any fast cars circulating around a driver like that.
Yeah.
I think we just went into a lot of detail about his crash, and it saves us a little bit of time about the next crash, because it happened almost exactly at the same place. It's most the exact same thing. Max Verstappen leading the race on lap 47 of 51. There was 4 laps left. Has a crash exactly like Stroll on the straightaway.
And so I just, as a total side note, I got up in the morning and watched this race, and then afterwards we went over to a friend's house and had an outside brunch, and he put the race up on outside, and he had Max Verstappen on his fantasy team. He also had Valtteri Bottas, because he knows Bottas won there, not last year, but I think the year before. He has won there before. So he, the whole race is cursing Bottas for not doing well, but he's like, it's okay. Max is my saving grace. Max is my saving grace. And I had already watched the race, so I'm sitting there, my like lips are sealed, just waiting to hear this guy's reaction for when the crash happens. And it happens, and he just stands up and he's screaming. This is the most animated I've ever seen somebody about Formula One. He did like a full lap of the backyard, just what? No.
No.
So that's my side note. On another point, I don't think the race had to be restarted. I'm glad it was, and it gave for a very exciting finish. But
yeah,
I personally think it could have stopped there. That's 2 pretty obvious tire failures, in my opinion. For the safety of the drivers, man, I don't know why that race continued.
All right. I would want to say that, like, the fact that I wouldn't even want to erase a finish on a red flag, like that kind of kills the whole idea of the sport. You gotta have to give the opportunities to the followers and everything to, get position and everything. Um, I'm happy that they restarted. I'm like, I'm not gonna say anything bad about the fact that they restarted because it just gave us an incredible ending to this race.
I mean, once it restarted, and obviously we saw how insanely exciting the final 2 laps were. I'm glad that it did restart, but in that whole 35-minute red flag session, I'm sitting there going, just end the race. Like, there's 4 laps left. You can award full points after 75% race distance. I don't know if it's safe. There's potentially debris on the track that's slicing up these tires. Maybe like the tires aren't strong enough. I think if I were a driver, there'd definitely be a little part of me that's thinking like, why are we going back out? But
I agree.
definitely, I'm in the long run, hindsight being 2020. I'm very happy that we got the restart.
Yeah, and I think the biggest point here, and like I'll bring the attention to it, is just the fact that you said it. There was debris on the track. Um, the real answers haven't come out yet. If what was the reason of both Stroll and Verstappen's crash? Uh, I know your opinion, Wills. I know who you think is to blame. I still believe that there's probably was some road debris to blame, but the fact that throughout all of quality there was a lot of crashes that puts debris on the tracks. Then Stroll had a crash on the straightaways. That means every car is probably going right through those damage, those micro carbon fiber shards and everything, picking it up in their tires. Um, who knows? A couple of more of those laps, and you're right. Like, that's just more debris, asking for more chance of crashes. And so I think it's important here to say that they did restart, but they restarted by putting new tires on every driver's car, which I think made for a really interesting race as well.
Yeah, and I like it basically, it kind of split the race into like sort of 2 parts of the battle of attrition on the hard tires, and obviously they're not the fastest tire available, but they are the longest lasting. So who could do better on those tires. And then we almost got like a potentially what a sprint race qualifying would
Yeah,
look like.
exactly. I agree with that. It almost looked like, well, yeah, it almost looked like a sprint race, which is pretty crazy because I mean, if that's what we're gonna get as action, I'm looking forward to it. I think we can almost start race version 2 right here. So this is the other session of the race. So this is race session 2. 35-minute restart, red flag before a restart. Can you imagine what that does to you as a driver, as the mindset? I feel like, imagine playing football or soccer or hockey, and all of a sudden somebody says, "Okay, stop. Go watch TV for an hour." And then come and finish your game. Like, man, way to throw you off your focus, off your energy, off what you're doing. It's gonna be difficult for those drivers.
And especially, like, they had already done most of the race. Like, they had already been racing for 2 hours. Like, you are pretty fatigued at that point as well. So to be able to keep the mental wherewithal to be on top of your game right where you need to be, I think is super impressive from these drivers. And you have to be an athlete to be able to keep your focus in those kinds of situations. And I thought it was interesting when they sort of showed what everybody was kind of doing on the grid. It seems like every driver has a sort of different routine when that happens. Daniel Ricciardo was right in, immediately had his headphones and fully jamming out to music. And then you saw George Russell and a bunch of guys just sitting down, taking a minute to cool down, catch their breath, sort of regain themselves and recompose themselves for the restart. So I think it's pretty interesting to see the sort of different ideologies and the different ways that guys stay in the zone.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it kind of brings me to the racing start, because I think it might have impacted a couple of drivers. So I'm glad we had a standing start, meaning that all the cars had a formation lap, warmed up their tires, a lot of zigzag, which always very funny to see. I love seeing that stuff because it looks pretty crazy. All those cars, planted down, just doing massive zigzags, just trying to get some heat in their tires. And they arrive, set up for the positions. You correct me if I'm wrong, but first position at that point was Perez, followed by Hamilton. Who was the two behind? It was Leclerc and Norris, right? Or was
it was Perez, Hamilton, Gasly, and Vettel were the top 4.
Yes. Okay, great. So that's another point. Vettel
Had
started P11.
Race.
P11, now he's P4. Can we just take a moment to appreciate the strategy at Aston
Super
Martin?
Seb.
The driving by Seb, man. So he's already P4, and let's just see what happens. So I think the best part you could do for yourself is go look at a video or a picture, but it looks pretty crazy because you see all those cars just did a formation lap, trying to warm up their tires. They're lined up, they're waiting for the lights to drop, and you see smoke coming out of the tires. The tires are overheating. They need to start rolling around.
Yeah, the
a lot of smoke from Hamilton. I was wondering if he had a brake fire. I was really worried for him there. I was like, oh man, are they gonna get the fire extinguishers out right now? Like, what is happening?
Watching the race with my dad, he was sitting there going, man, if my brakes were smoking like that, I would be stressed.
But the lights drop. Perez starts off the line. He's kind of slow, not the best.
Not a good start for Perez, yeah.
Hamilton is strong start, very strong start. I mean, of course, he has a very good motor. He's been practicing the strong start for, I don't know, what is it, 6 championship in a row now of him dominating. Like, he's very good. He has his own technique. And you see him right away. He has that start, and he's trying to put his nose between him and Perez in the first corner and try to get that P1 because there's 2 laps left. You have to be aggressive. You got to fight for every place because there's not a lot of catching up to do after that. And then I think the moment I screamed the most in the last week, maybe, I don't know how long, but I definitely was screaming. Hamilton just locked up and completely missed his turn. How did you live that? What happened in your head during that moment?
Oh my God. It's exactly what I did. Because that's just not like something you really see from Lewis Hamilton. And, he's usually like one of the best guys on the brakes. You don't see him lock up the brakes all that often. He's usually very consistent and just went straight on. And so do you want to talk about the so-called magic button?
Oh yeah, of course, as everything comes, a lot of thing comes up on the internet after the race. A lot of questions get answered, people get interviewed, people try to figure out what happened. People thought that Hamilton had just messed up, hadn't really got too greedy, sorry, and didn't leave himself enough room to brake in time, and so it was just a big mistake. Turns out it's a even dumber mistake than that. It's not just like, oh, he didn't calculate his distance correctly. No, apparently on the Mercedes driving wheel, there's a button that you can press that changes the brake bias and puts only brakes at the front. And this is a way to help the front tires warm up because as drivers do their formation lap, they'll use their brake a lot to try to just, get a lot of heat in their tires, in the brakes. And Mercedes has been known with their car that they have last year, this year, they had difficulty getting their front tires warm. And so,
which is Hamilton why they implemented the DOS system last year.
That's banned this year. And so I guess, Mercedes engineer are going to engineer and they find other solutions around that. And so this special button changes the brake bias, makes it so that he basically he only has brakes on the front now, while usually they would be brakes on all four wheels. And I think you want all four brakes in the Formula One race.
Oh, for sure.
Story says that he lines up waiting for the lights to drop. And the crazy thing is, you see a picture. Reddit is an incredible thing for that, where everybody starts looking for clue and evidence. But Lewis has a very particular driving style where he'll put his left hand over the racing wheel instead of on the sides where you normally stand. He kind of puts it over, and so he finds that he better feels the clutch that way, and he has good starts. So I mean, I'm not
because
saying he has a
the
weird
clutch
technique.
and the clutches on Formula One cars are on the steering wheel, because they obviously are tight for space at where the driver's feet are. So they put the clutch on the steering wheel, so it's all hand operated.
Yeah, so they're paddle clutches, and so he has this technique, and so that's it. The story goes that while trying to line up, he would have pressed that button. Maybe he forgot to turn it off. Maybe an engineer at Mercedes forgot to do it remotely. The whole story hasn't come out yet, but that's at least Mercedes' excuses for now, is that apparently that button that was still pressed, the back brake were still disabled off the line, and so when Hamilton came to brake, he just kept going. Can you imagine Hamilton's face at that point? He must have been livid.
Whoa, well, and you got to think too, like when you go and like to hit the brakes, and if like you forget that you have that button on and you just start going straight on, like the confusion
Yeah,
like must be going on for him.
Yeah, and so incredibly good for the sport, I'll say. Sadly, anytime Lewis is messed up, only makes for a more exciting race and more exciting podium and bigger celebrations. So tough luck for you, Lewis. But what a finish afterwards. So we have 2 laps. Lewis's Hamilton went straight forward, completely out of the pack. Entire pack passes him. Lewis is dead last, and he's not going to move from there, so we can forget about him. Perez keeps his first position, and then Sebastian Vettel just beautifully passes Gasly in one of the corners. You got to remember, there's 2 laps, and so there's not a lot of time for messing around. And I think that was one of my favorite part about this, is that you really saw a driver just say fuck it and just send it, because they were just saying like, well, we're gonna try to get those points. And so Sebastian went from P4 to P2. Gasly was able to defend, because Gasly was P3 right at the restart. Is that what we're saying? So
Yeah,
he did a swap with Vettel, but then took Hamilton, but then they both went up, and so the race finishes. Perez is first, Sebastian Vettel second, and then we have AlphaTauri's Gasly P3. And we wrote it down on these notes. I'm looking at it, but what a podium, like what a refreshing, what an interesting podium to have. And a crazy thing is how this did not affect at all the drivers' championship.
yeah, it like I think definitely it shuffled up the midfield a lot. But yeah, in terms of like the actual who's gonna win the championship, that stays at a standstill from when we left Monaco. And it's gonna make the next race in Paul Ricard so much more exciting. That's a track with big long straightaways. It should favor the speed of the Mercedes, I think. So that'll be an interesting race to watch.
And so there you go. I think that kind of finishes the race. I was, like, what a great podium. Like I keep saying, I think we can kind of go through the last little standings. So Perez first, Vettel second, Gasly third. In fourth, Charles Leclerc. So Charles started first, lost a couple positions, but you can't be angry with a P. Well, you definitely can. He misses the podium by a little bit. Still P4, good points for Ferrari. Norris
and
P5.
he did have sorry, Leclerc did have a nice fight with Gasly to try and get that third spot. So
Yeah,
it wasn't it's not an empty fourth for him. There was definitely
and he ran out of laps at this point, right? It's like, who knows, with a couple more laps of trying to do things, but he ran out of time. Alonso P6, his best showing by far. Alpine was very happy with that. P6 for Alonso is really good.
Yeah,
and then
it's a really good finish for him this season, and definitely from the struggles he's definitely been having in that car. Glad to see Alonso back up higher in the
Tsunoda
points.
P7. Sainz
Great
P8.
finish for Yuki.
Sainz, not the best race for him. Started P5, finished P8. So that wasn't what Ferrari was looking for. Right after that, Ricciardo. At the end of the day, this is a pretty good race for Ferrari. Both of their cars, one above a McLaren. So in their fight for the third place, definitely
best of the rest. Yeah.
Raikkonen P10, his first points of this season. As the ever very expressive man, you hear on the radio his engineer going, P10, well done, first points, Raikkonen, like, well done, great race. And he goes with a classic meh, and that's it. That's all you hear. So incredible stuff.
Man of many words.
All right, Giovinazzi P11, Bottas P12, Schumacher P13, Mazepin P14, Hamilton P15, and then Latifi P16. So for all the haters out there who said Mazepin will never beat Hamilton, he just did, finish ahead of him on the race. So take that. Good to see Schumacher P13. Of course, it kind of comes from a lot of DQs, but good for him. Like higher standings, he's getting there. And then at the end of the day, Bottas finished the race ahead of his teammate Hamilton. So even though he keeps
take what you can get, Valtteri, take what you can get.
Even though he keeps getting given an L, he's still fighting, and he kind of came out ahead. So great thing to see. That's about it. I think we can kind of wrap this up. This has been going on for a while. There's no race next weekend. We're gonna find something special to talk about. We'll be there next weekend. And there you go. Do you have anything else to add, Wills?
Before we go, next week, or not next weekend, but in 2 weeks at the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard, Romain Grosjean is going to get to have a test in the 2018 Mercedes. Now, Mercedes isn't really a team that I would think would just sort of throw, here, Romain, like have a fun, weekend drive in our car, see if you like it, have a nice goodbye to Formula One. I feel like this probably is somewhat of a legitimate test for him, and potentially a path back into Formula One. Maybe not as a racer, but potentially as a test driver, something. So I'm excited to see where that goes for Romain. I'd love to see him back in the sport because he's definitely a driver with a lot of talent. I just think he's always had the worst of luck when it comes to his Grand Prix racing.
Yeah,
so I'm definitely excited to potentially see, Romain return to the grid in some sort of fashion.
I think that's great. And we'll definitely talk about that as well. And I'm sure it's gonna be a lot of television, and a lot of media is gonna follow that as well.
Oh yeah.
All right. Thank you everybody for following along. As always, my name is Simon with my co-host Wills. We're very happy that you followed along, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye, everybody.